I'm very pleased to see so many of our donors here in person, and I know we also have a number of donors online. I warmly welcome all of you. Many of you have been active supporters both of the Foundation and the St Vincent's current endowment program for many years. Thank you for this. In 2023, from our endowment, we awarded $1.5 million in grants across 35 projects. And whilst this is a wonderful result, it is only a small proportion of the 126 very worthy applications we received in 2023. In other words, there are a number of applications we would have liked to have been able to meet, but there is only a certain amount of money we have at this stage anyway. Indeed, as we acknowledge the 40th anniversary of the endowment and the Foundation and the impact it has made, we also hope to fast-track the growth of the endowment so we can meet the increasing needs of the hospital. Our goal is to reach $50 million for the endowment by the end of 2025, so as to increase the quantum of annual grants to the hospital from this fund. And we're more than happy to reach that goal before the end of 2025.
40 years since the Foundation and the endowment were first established, as you just heard. And the generous support of the Foundation has enabled so many amazing things to happen at St Vincent's. So tonight we're going to take you through just some of the things that have been possible as a result of the endowment, and the things that just wouldn't have been possible without the support of the current Foundation and the endowment in particular. So Annika, let's start with you. I'm going to start with you. You were closely involved with something that not only changed St Vincent's, but almost everyone and everywhere in the world, and that was COVID. And it took us all by surprise, but that must have been even more so for people working in the health area. Can you take us through what it was like in the early stages working at St Vincent's and the role that the endowment played as well?
Definitely. Thank you for having me. So at the start of sort of the second wave of COVID in 2021, I was 3 or 4 months into a new role as the first time being an operations manager. So everything was a steep learning curve. And then COVID hit in a very big way. So it was massive. There was excitement, there was energy, uncertainty, all sorts of emotions rolled into one. I guess in terms of where I was when that sort of happened, I think it was about July 2021 when the next big wave hit, was my manager had been sort of seconded into helping to support the virtual care aspect of our hospital in the home service, to sort of support their normal functions, to build capacity to treat more patients in the community. My background had been treating lots of patients in the community as a physiotherapist, so that community link was very common to me, and I understood what that meant. But it was on a random Saturday that I had my manager's name coming onto my phone that I thought, this is a little odd. So we had a very good relationship, but that Saturday call was strange. So I answered with a bit of trepidation, and from that moment I was called into work Saturday about 1 o'clock, and for about 9 to 12 months that became my new role as the operations manager for our virtual hospital in the home COVID care service. So a very big steep learning curve and a very big identification of a lot of things that we needed that we didn't have and hadn't set up in time for this massive wave.
And so just take us through some of the steps to get to that point, the planning, and what was the team like, the energy in the team having to roll out this huge new initiative that had never been done before, the hospital in the home initiative like that?
It was certainly a massive feat. It was quite possibly the best display of teamwork I've ever seen or been a part of. It was magic. We had staff from all across the hospital, from all disciplines, all seniority. It was the biggest display of no ego, no hierarchy. Everyone was equal. Things were changing so rapidly that a nurse practitioner or a doctor was teaching, a junior staff member, and they went off on one day, and then they were teaching the doctor the next day on what the changes were and how they were to treat patients. There was a significant amount of planning, projecting into the unknown. That was probably the hardest part, is just sort of picking things out of thin air, what was happening yesterday, what was happening in Western Sydney, what was happening, in different states, and trying to sort of pull together something that resembled what may or may not happen tomorrow, and project into the next week, the next month. Essentially, my Excel skills excelled during that period of time, using lots of different formulas to sort of support what may my workforce plan look like, and how many people I needed to call upon to join the ranks in the COVID care service.
And tell us about the role that the current foundation played and the impact it had on allowing these initiatives to happen.
Absolutely. So it was integral, it was crucial, without it, we would have been swallowed by COVID. Essentially, it enabled us to have all the IT equipment, the computers, the cameras, the accessibility to our patients. Our main goal was to treat patients, keep them at home, keep them safe, keep them from roaming the community, but keep them out of our ED. So that was huge, trying to ensure that every patient who was on our books was cared for, had everything they needed. In the initial stages, there was sort of a lot of consultation and looking at which platform and IT system that would best support us during this phase. And with the current support, we were able to have our hands-on care monitor, which is an incredible system which enables us to have, access to our patients essentially through your phone, as if you're just texting your friend. So it was a way for us to have a really easy way for patients to provide their information on their health. We were able to also send out pulse oximeters, which measured their oxygen levels, thermometers, medications that they needed to keep them safe and healthy at home. And without that funding, we wouldn't have been able to have that. And really, thankfully, I want to say that no one died on our watch at home with being able to access this platform, all the equipment that we needed, and we're able to get it out to all our patients. It was a mammoth effort from almost every department across the hospital, but without that initial support, it would be nothing.
So we're now going to step back in time a little bit. It's not that far for some of us, but just back to the 1990s, and again, another something that the endowment played a massive role in that you may not be aware of. So imagine we're back in 1990, and at the time, the government was looking to move cancer care services out of St Vincent's to the Prince of Wales Hospital. So Dion, can you take us through the impact that would have had if patients, it was to do with radiotherapy, if they would have had to have gone to Prince of Wales at that point?
Yeah, I think, the largest capital component of a cancer service is usually a radiotherapy machine, and obviously that's what they wanted to do, was not replace ailing machines that they had. And so it was... I hadn't appreciated that was the history of this place in the 90s. I think it doesn't seem that long ago for us. I was wondering whether the panel were even born, but anyway. Clearly they decided the easiest way to deal with a problem, substantial capital requirement, was just to close the service. Thankfully that didn't happen, because we certainly can't claim to be a comprehensive cancer service without radiotherapy.
No.
Those of you that haven't been touched by radiotherapy, you would know that those that have would know it's a very challenging time. It's usually a sort of long course of treatment, and there can be substantial side effects. But in fact, radiotherapy is involved in 40% of cancer cures, and the data suggests that about 48% of people that have cancer at some point in their cancer treatment should have radiotherapy.
Right.
And we know the rates aren't actually, the utilisation rates haven't met that optimal level, but that sending people, sort of fragmenting their care. In those days, of course, there was not much that was electronic, and so you just think of sort of fragmenting their care between here and Prince of Wales and all of the paper that would fly around. One would have been unsafe from a clinical perspective, but then the impact on patients would have been enormous.
And so tell us about the fact that the current foundation could step in and provide some funding so that didn't have to happen.
Yeah, so in fact what I learnt was the current foundation actually paid for 2 machines, and we learnt that their names were Donald and Daisy. Fairly cute, isn't it? So, I mean, that must have made, a substantial difference. It means that we still have radiotherapy in a different form, but on this campus today. I mean, once it's gone, it's gone. You know, you don't see services open. There had been radiotherapy services at Sydney Hospital. They'd closed down pre that, I think. I think they closed in the 80s. And, you know, they've never started up there again.
No.
And so... the problem is that, you know, with the fact that being a sort of longish course of treatment, we think of all the great work done in this place, particularly in the haematological malignancy space, where people have bone marrow transplants. For some patients, part of their conditioning and preparation for the bone marrow transplant is to have what's called total body irradiation. Those patients... basically for, you know, a day, usually sort of 5 treatments or so. Each day they come from the ward, they have their radiotherapy, which is not easy. They're having their whole body irradiated. They feel unwell afterwards. We also got to think back to the 90s, and our techniques were not nearly as good as they are today. So there was a lot more side effects. Think of an inpatient, you know, with bone pain from a spot of cancer that had spread to their bones, having radio going off in an ambulance, you know, feel every jolt along the way, having their treatment, then being brought back, or sort of going over there for part of their treatment and then coming back, you know, hugely challenging. In those days, patients would get a minimum of 5 treatments for their cancer. The average course length, so the average number of treatments per course of treatment in those days was typically, though, around 25. And, I mean, today it's come down to more like 15. But, you know, that meant someone was coming from somewhere for those, you know, each day for those treatments from further. We obviously also have supported historically here Murrumbidgee. Certainly in 1990, Murrumbidgee didn't have radiotherapy services. Prince of Wales at that time was supporting places like Campbelltown and southwestern Sydney, where, you know, there weren't radiotherapy services until the mid-90s. I think in Liverpool opened in about 1996. Campbelltown opened a centre in about 2003. So Prince of Wales were quite busy at that time. There were long waiting lists. I mean, I only arrived in New South Wales in 2003. At that stage, there were 9-week waits for radiotherapy. There'd been, and this had been ongoing for a long time. There was also a lot of old equipment. I said to Sophie before, when I arrived, the talk was that the machine at RPA had just had its 21st birthday.
Not ideal, is it?
That's not ideal. And in fact, what we know is that these machines, their life is somewhere between 8 and 12 years. But they sound, I mean, in today's money, they're about 3.5 million. But about 400 new courses of radiotherapy a year. That's actually more like sort of 10,000 treatments in a year. So I think, you know, it's a fantastic example of if that didn't happen, you know, I hate to think what this cancer service would have looked like. And I doubt that very much in 2012 there would have been the agreement, the partnership between the Garvan and St Vincent's to form the Kinghorn Cancer Centre, which of course today is a leading comprehensive cancer centre. And in fact, I was at a meeting today where the discussion was that philanthropy has actually supported a lot of the breakthroughs and a lot of the development. I mean, some people think it sort of just props things up, but it's actually far more than that. So, yeah, I think obviously this cancer service is very much indebted to the foundation and continues to be so well supported by the foundation.
And a key focus for the endowment has been the funding of research projects. And many of you probably know people that might have been impacted by stroke and how rehabilitation plays such a big role when it comes to stroke care. And St Vincent's has long been a centre of excellence for stroke care and rehabilitation. So Lauren, tell us a bit about your endowment grant that you received to look at investigating robotics as a way of rehabilitating stroke patients.
Thanks very much, Sophie, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share this evening. We are currently running, it's called the RAISE trial. Most people within this room will know someone who has experienced a stroke. It is one of the leading causes of death and disability within our country and globally. And unfortunately, 4 out of 5 stroke survivors will experience impairments in their upper limb after stroke, which then impacts on a person's ability to complete their day-to-day activities, to return to work, to return to their leisure interests. It has an impact on the level of care and support that they need when they're discharged from hospital, and has a significant impact on their overall quality of life. But what we know from audits that have been done in our stroke services in Australia is that only about 8 minutes per day of rehabilitation is dedicated to people being able to have upper limb therapy. So we've got a big gap there that we need to address, particularly because we know from the neuroscience literature that's now out there in the world in terms of neuroplasticity. Many of you might have heard of the brain that changes itself. People need to be doing lots and lots and lots of therapy in order to get recovery.
So you need a lot more than 8 minutes a day.
A lot more. We're talking in the hundreds of repetitions. If we think about it like a dose like we would a pill, people are just not getting enough. And robotics is one way we can address that gap. Robotic therapy is recommended in our clinical guidelines now, but one of the challenges we have is that the robotic devices are generally really expensive. It costs, around $250,000 for a single device. They're very cumbersome. They require staff to have additional training, and so that's very challenging for us to then be able to use that routinely. And what we're doing within our study in collaboration with some international partners is trialling a new portable robotic device that can be built for a couple of $1,000s. This device will mean that people are able to practice at their bedside. They can practice independently, so they can be doing more of that extra practice. And it's portable, which means they can continue it as part of their recovery at home. And so we'll be looking at what the outcomes are around using this device in addition to our traditional usual rehabilitation.
And can you just take us through, for the audience, how does the robot, what does it look like? How does it work?
Yeah, it's a small box device that has an exoskeleton component that the person then puts their hand into. And we use something that's referred to as EMG activation. So the person thinks about moving their affected arm, and whilst they might not yet have the required level of strength to be able to physically move their hand, them sending that signal from their brain activates the machine and then helps them to move their hand. So then they're getting feedback that they're thinking the right pattern in order to get that recovery of motor movement. The device...
It's using the fact that they can still think about moving their hand, even if they can't move their hand.
That's right.
It's sort of re-establishing the brain patterns and the pathway.
That's right. The device has a really simple interface too, so that the person would be able to, pop their arm in the device and use it without a therapist necessarily needing to be present, which means people can do more practice on their own. And then it also focuses more on movements at the wrist and fingers, which are often the most challenging to get return from after stroke, but we also know are movements that are absolutely critical to you being able to use your hand in day-to-day activities. If you think about being able to pick up a cup or brush your teeth, we need to be able to have those movements to open your hand.
And so, and where are you up to with the trial? You don't have you don't have it yet, do you? Because we're like, oh, well, can you bring the robot and show the robot? But you don't actually have it yet, do you?
No, we don't have it here on site, but we are well underway. We're in the setup phase. My colleague Kate is in the audience, who's working on the project with me, but we're due to start within the next month or two, which we are absolutely thrilled about. The other really exciting component of this study is that we're also collecting some biomarkers, which is something that hasn't been done before. So when I refer to biomarkers, it's getting things like saliva samples and using advanced imaging to look at gene expression, changes in people's brain anatomy, to look at who responds to this therapy and who doesn't. So Dion would know a lot about personalised medicine in cancer. This is a big area of focus, and now we're starting to look at some of those things around rehabilitation so that we can tailor interventions for the right person at the right point in their recovery.
So that might give you better insight into who might be more appropriate to use this type of thing, to see who responds the best to this type of approach.
Right. Yes.
Fantastic. And so basically, and this wouldn't have been possible without the philanthropy.
Absolutely not. We are so grateful to the Curran Foundation for supporting this program of work. As an allied health professional, we have a lot more challenges with securing grant funding. So this has just absolutely made this body of work possible for us. And we then love the fact as well it means that we can deliver this sort of innovative intervention to people very early on in their recovery as part of their care here at the hospital, which is fantastic.
Amazing. Well, we look forward to having a future Inside St Vincent's where you can come back and report the results.
Yes, and we'll bring the device so we can do a
That
show
would be
and tell.
amazing. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. So Annika, I want to bring it back to you. You mentioned earlier that the response to COVID really changed the future for a number of areas of healthcare. Can you take us through what that looks like now? Like, what impact did it have on the sort of the broader healthcare system here at St Vincent's?
Definitely. So I think, for one, our workforce is a lot more capable to do a lot more things. We have the processes to scale and plan for what we hope does not happen. We can, look at treating more patients virtually than the inpatients in our hospital, which we experience successfully already. The other thing is that remote patient monitoring and virtual care. We've learnt that this is a really innovative and successful way of treating patients and are really the next steps in future in certainly chronic disease management, but it also allows us to treat more patients, larger scales, and broaden our reach to our regional and rural partners as well. So more people will be able to access the same, sort of healthcare that people in metropolitan areas can access very, very easily. So
fantastic. And we just wanted to talk about the importance of the fact that the endowment is discretionary funding, and that what that means is that St Vincent's can basically, take action immediately and urgently when a need arises. Dion, can you talk about that and in terms of how difficult it would be to not have discretionary funding that you can use like we can with the endowment?
Yeah, I think we can't always predict what we're going to need in the next 12 months. Things just change so quickly these days, and so it really does give that opportunity that, we know those grants are coming up, and, I think particularly coming back to the allied health theme, it's really hard for allied health. It's actually very hard to get funding to support research, the amazing stuff that you're doing, and, the trend, for instance, in cancer. There's a big role for OT, but there's not a lot of OTs that are around, and that's a funding issue. And so there's certainly, we see these opportunities, and they're not necessarily big scale. They're not necessarily as at the first stage, the early stage projects, going to be as impactful as a new treatment machine like a linear accelerator. But these things often start small and then grow. And it's that sort of seed funding that can just be so important to get something happening before you can then go and get larger funding from business, potentially someone who sees an opportunity in that space.
Fantastic. And yeah, I was just going to ask you, Lauren, it must be difficult with allied health to find funding, because it's hard enough for other branches of research to get funded, but it sounds like it's even harder for allied health.
Yeah, it can be really challenging. We're competing in a very demanding environment where there's just not enough resources to go around. But I think that's where we feel so grateful to the Curran Foundation for supporting this research, because this will provide us with that pilot information that we can then scale up and look to be applying for further research funding for a project like this in the future. So this really provides us with such a fantastic opportunity that otherwise wouldn't be there. And I think there's, for allied health, we were talking a little bit earlier, there's a lot of focus often on acute treatments, but allied health plays such a critical role in supporting people to have a good life after hospital in those next phases. And so having the opportunity to be able to do some of this work is just absolutely fantastic.
Excellent. And I was just going to ask Dion, this is a question without notice, but the rate of success for NH and MRC research grants, so that which is the major funding body that researchers go to, it's pretty low, isn't it?
It's extremely low.
It's really low.
Yes, it's around that
11%.
It's around 11%. So that means only 11% of the researchers who put in a grant to the main body to get funding get funded. So the vast majority of amazing research grants get a big no stamped on it.
And you really need to have had, some data to support what you're doing, and so that seed funding is very important for that. And the other source now are these MRFF grants as well, but again, the rates are very low. A huge amount of work to put them in. I often wonder, how come my colleagues are willing to do something where there's a less than 10% success rate? I don't think it's energy well spent, but I admire them.
But I guess if you're a working scientist and a researcher, and you need funding. I was talking to Bryce Bissell about that just a minute ago, about how hard it is for clinicians and scientists who not only have to do the work and the groundbreaking work, but then constantly trying to get the funding for the work that they do, which is, again, why something like the foundation and the endowment are just so valuable.
Your support of the St Vincent's Curran Endowment and the foundation over nearly 40 years has allowed us to create the best possible environment for our dedicated doctors and nurses to care for our patients, and that's been illustrated once again by our panellists tonight, and to retain the leading team of doctors, nurses and researchers which distinguishes St Vincent's and has established its reputation for excellence. And if anybody would like to find out more about how to support the endowment, you know who are members of the team who'd be very happy here to talk to you. Now, none of us could have envisaged the growth of the foundation and the incredible developments across the St Vincent's healthcare precinct at Darlinghurst and beyond over the last 40 years. And in the same way, none of us can imagine the outcome of innovation and promise of cures and treatments that will be realised in the next 40 years. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a good evening, and many, many thanks for all that you do for St Vincent's.